Hi and welcome to the Imagine Film Festival 2023 podcast series, consisting of 4 episodes that explore this year's festival theme, which is Fantastic Alchemy. My name is Stan Guzinski and I'm a features and XR programmer of Imagine Film Festival.
And I am Hugo Emmerzaal and I'm a freelance film critic and a curator, and I'm very happy to also be the co-host of this exciting new podcast series.
So, why alchemy? Alchemy is in equal terms magic and storytelling, and in that respect it is very close to the DNA of Imagine, which revolves around fantastic fiction. We began to wonder if it is a dead historical tradition or can we draw some energy and inspiration from it. Instead of featuring films specifically about alchemy, we asked ourselves what works could be considered alchemical in spirit and help us see what alchemical elements might still be relevant today. We wish to revive the alchemical spirit and invite the audience to look at alchemy not as a historical curiosity, but as a source of inspiration for addressing contemporary challenges through the mix of 4 ingredients: technology, narrative, identity, and substance, which in turn will manifest in film screenings, VR works, conversations, workshops, live events, exhibition, and podcasts.
Alchemy was an invitation to learn through diverse means: reading, observing, listening, but also touch, play, destruction, and transformation. And as our society struggles against the dangers of populism, grapples with the developments of AI, and comes to terms with the fluidity of identity and gender, we are in desperate need of such powerful interdisciplinary paradigm, which could help us connect our lived experiences with reliable knowledge.
And if that sounds a bit eccentric and far-fetched, we have this podcast to make it feel less so. In this episode, we explore the topic of technology, which is perhaps one of the most tangible elements through which we can channel the alchemical reflection today. The groundwork of alchemy was never about the technology itself, but would not be possible without it, inspiring great technological innovations throughout centuries. In this episode, we look both at films and VR works, which use technology to tame digital matter and channel it through the medium of storytelling to make emotionally resonant experiences.
This episode consists of 2 separate interviews. Our first conversation is with Norman Leto, the Polish filmmaker and creative mastermind behind the 2017 opus Photon, to be screened at Imagine Film Festival. And in our humble opinion, Photon is one of the festival highlights. It is a mesmerizing hybrid between a thoroughly researched meditation on the existence of matter, from the tiniest photon to the grandest structures of the universe, and a piece of speculative science fiction that explores society's past, present, and uncanny future.
Leto is an autodidact and a film auteur that has constructed this tremendous piece which stands at the intersection of science and fiction all by himself. And as such, we could see him as a modern alchemist in his own right, accumulating knowledge and converting that into spellbinding visuals that shine light on the mysterious substances of life itself.
Our second interview covers a seemingly more intimate but no less important work of art. We invite multi-hyphenate director, composer and inventor Steye Hallema to discuss his latest VR experience, Imaginary Friend, that premiered in the prestigious immersive section of Venice Film Festival and is presented at Imagine's XR section alongside 6 other works.
Imaginary Friend is a landmark piece that showcases the capabilities of VR as storytelling medium, all thanks to Hallema's ingenious ways of making the player part of the narrative. Making the spectator a product of imagination of a young boy struck with grief, Steye deploys his whole narrative toolbox to make you fully immersed and transformed by the story, not unlike the lead being transformed into gold in an alchemical process.
So first off, we're joined by Norman Leto, who was generous enough today to make time for us, despite having a very stressful surgery appointment for his beloved dog on the very same morning.
So welcome Norman. It's so nice to have you with us despite the circumstances. And you will not be coming to Imagine, so we're really glad that we have an opportunity to talk to you now, because this episode is going to serve for our audiences also this kind of a backdrop for the movie that they will see. And I have no doubts that this movie is going to raise a lot of questions among our audience. So I guess the question that I wanted to start with, because we are a fantastic film festival after all, we do science fiction, we do fantasy films, and in my description of the movie in the catalog, I used this phrase. I call this movie one of the most radical hard sci-fi films I've seen in recent years. And I wanted to ask you about your approach to that label when you were actually preparing to make that film. Like how much you were thinking about it as an attempt to visualize or give images to science and to scientific discoveries, and how much this fictitious angle, so like the subjectivity of that scientist who has a very peculiar take on reality as well, was a factor for you.
Well, I think I started from the point of view, I try to be quite as objective as I can be, because most of the documentaries I saw before were very, very subjective or too boring as being very, very objective. I mean, I saw a very good science films, but they were so, unprepared to show it to be shown to general public, that it was, it was like pain in the ass to show it to a general audience. They would just leave the cinema, and I wanted to find some kind of visual language that would help it to show these very fine microscopical machines that are going on, that are, already right now in our bodies doing this very abstract and actually fantastic things inside our cells, and to show it in a way that it was never shown before. But on the other hand, I didn't want it to disappoint scientists who work in those in those particular fields. So I started my journey by investing like 5 years of my life, perhaps 3 years, because 5 years was the general time of making this film. But 3 years were like looking up in the literature, in the websites, starting from Wikipedia, then going down the rabbit hole of scientific works, then contacting some scientists in those fields in Poland, sometimes just exchanging emails with particular people from other countries. But the nice thing about science is it's pretty universal. There is no like better science or better answers in the United States than in, Polish, some kind of university in Poland. So that is beautiful. There is no, I don't know, Israeli science or Russian science, or there's nothing like that. So what I could get here in university from my colleagues was very, very, very good, and very enough to be shown to the film, which is then shown in the very many countries later on.
Well, the question, well, the following step in the question and in the answer is how then the hard data and the science that and the knowledge that you accumulated over these years translates into a film that also dares to make this leap into something much more speculative and imaginary and full on engages with the ideas of science fiction. So basically,
Okay.
how do you see that relationship between the science and the fiction, and how they interplay within Photon in this fascinating way?
Yeah, okay. I would say like science is 70% from my point of view, and fiction is about 30%. In my, of course, it might be felt different, but this is what I would like to have it in a Photon. The final 15 minutes is very science fiction, and it's very fiction because it's kind of very brave throw in the future, and just trying to say how everything will look, how life will look within like million of years, for example, which is pretty bold. As for any scientist, they really don't like to talk about future. It's obvious because they're other guy of very hard evidence, not conjectures and thinking about the futures. But it was like poet, poetic license. I had a poetic license for showing it up because I never promised anything in this film up to that point when the narrator is saying about the biology physics, about current knowledge of our about knowledge on how life happened on our planet, and suddenly the journalist is asking for him just to say then to let's try to pretend you will be asked. Someone asks you how the science will look in, or world will look in 100, 1000 years from now, and the general and our narrator is trying to defend himself. He won't do this, but the interlocutor is pushing him even more, so he starts to play this game, and he starts to talking. Then I'm talking about this scene because by this scene I wanted to show you that's not, scientists don't want to talk about it, but okay, if you push them really hard, they will start to just to think, think as everyone has some vision of future, and there was some, in my case, there was some conjecture from my side, some private conjectures, some private looking. When I was looking around myself, I have some observations which were put into the Photon, into the last 15 minutes of Photon. But the first, I would say 70% is in general very scientific, and it was consulted. I was showing the Photon in university in Warsaw, in University of Biology. I don't know how to spell the whole name in English, so
you can do it in Polish as well.
yeah. So excuse me, but and it was this, and it was the hall was full of scientists, of quantum physicists, and there was even a guy who is on the top, the rector. I don't know how it's in the rector in in English.
Still works, yeah, rector, yeah.
Yeah, and there was this guy from like known guy from talking about science and TV shows and so on, so on. And I was really, I was sitting then shaking because there was also a follow-up talk after the showing the film, and I was the guy who has no education at all. I don't even I never even finished high school, to be honest, fully with and I'm sitting here among all those guys, and they will be grilling me after this film, asking me why I did that, and I was just waiting, like I don't know, like a beaten dog, waiting for this horror to happen after the credits roll out, and nothing like that happened. I mean, they liked it. They had some questions about different nuances of visual aspects of the film, and nothing like that. I was I felt, after that I felt like all my internal objections that I could do this scene differently, or I could make this scene longer to explain more, all that all that fears that yes, they were gone just within hour after this screening among those guys, scientists. From that point, I was like calm in the terms of yeah, science, exactly. And science fiction is much easier, because no one can tell me like your science fiction is not as good as mine. Science fiction.
Yeah. Which leads me to a couple of questions. Like, I still want to revisit at some point also like the question of the personality of that main character. But before that, like you just mentioned something about spending all those years, those 3 to 5 years on learning science. I also know that you spent quite a considerable amount of time learning science for your previous film already, so for Sailor. So altogether, it's already like a long period of your life spending learning. And you also mentioned your history with, let's say, public and regular education, which was rocky at best. So like I'm wondering, because we're talking in this framework of alchemy, and alchemy is about, seeking knowledge for yourself and, like basically building yourself through discovery and experimental work and knowledge. And how important is it for you also that you have control over all those aspects of filmmaking, and that you are making a project, you are the one acquiring all that knowledge and kind of building yourself up to a point when you're ready to speak from that position with a certain amount of confidence? How important is that process of acquiring that knowledge for you when working on projects?
It's very important, but also it's kind of easy because it comes from my just natural curiosity. When I started doing Photon, I or even Sailor before that, but especially in case of Photon, I had this very just natural need to understand how things work, and the actual school just covered it with some useless meetings, problems, a lot of stress. I think I have some kind of PTSD after my high school, and it's obscured actual joy of knowing how the world is built and how things work. I was drawing since my childhood. I was drawing like little cross sections of things, of washing machines, of a flushing toilet, or anything to understand how what's going on inside this box. And exactly the same uh, uh, method came 30 years later when I was making Photon, and I started to think how my cell work, or how I work, just starting from myself. Why do I feel what I feel, and what is consciousness? And if you start asking those very simple questions, and you're like, and you're not going the easiest way, like religion or various uh, dogmas, anti-scientific dogmas, then you will find like all those Wikipedia pages. Then you will start thinking how it's okay if they say it works like this, then how it looks like. And I have like strong visual uh, tendencies in my brain, so I rather see things than I understand them. So it was even more easy because I see the scientific paper, and I think, okay, it sounds great, but why don't they show it on a drawing? And I will try to draw it, and then I started to do it, and it was very funny and visually striking way, like those kinesins on the during the cell division. There is this moment in the film where there are those teeny molecular robots are going along the microtubulus, and you simply can't. They never told us about in this at school about this. Nothing at all. I'm sure I would be interested as a kid because the machines always interested me, but no one told me that such things are going on. And what I'm talking about, it wasn't that hard. If someone says like it's like 5 years of hard studies, if you say you're making this like for 5 or more years, no, it was nice. It was it was like exploring the world again, and so it wasn't difficult. Uh, and it was very important. I mean, it was the main factor, because otherwise I would get bored if I had to do it without fun. I'm not this kind of person. Someone might think as I'm very the titan of work. No, if something is not fun for me, I won't do this. I'm very lazy person.
I have a question about then how in Photon we see the kind of like scientific data visualization that consists of a major part of the film where you visualize all of these processes that for the naked eye are invisible and that might not be often visualized or generated as images by other scientists, like you explain in scientific papers and journals. I'm just kind of like wondering what the process was for you to find a relationship between a certain aesthetic and a certain functionality so that you can convey the scientific ideas that you want to convey. Like when you work with the data visualization, I assume you have like a computer with that visualizes it. It has a set of parameters. You put some data into it. The output turns into, the input turns into output. Is that a process of trial and error? And are you happy with some of the unexpected happy accidents? Or do you try to have full authorial control as the director of what comes out of this process as well?
As you know, it's the scenes, and I am not a scientist. The scenes have to look like, but they don't necessarily are, scientific simulations. They're not, because this. I wanted to present general idea how the kinesins, this little molecular robot, is going on the microtubules, which is this pipe, I would say. And you have this small robot going on the very long stick, and you don't want to simulate every of his legs movement as you would have to if you're a scientist and working on a new drug. They have, for example, they need to simulate it in regards to every single atom, because they need the drug to work like it really is. So no, it wasn't that much of level, but still I was doing a lot of work to be at least close to that. So for a layman or even for scientists, general look is exactly the same as from those simulations, but it's it's not an emulation. It's just things that looks like, but that's not the point of this film. It's not about proving any new scientific, any theory. It's about bringing up the microscopic visual world. And also this question of yours is very important in the first 20 minutes, where I'm talking about quantum physics, and no one can even show how it looks like, because there is no, at this level of reality, the life doesn't bounce off anymore. The the X, Y, and Z starts to bend, and we don't understand what's going on in terms of space and time, actually. And we only see that numbers in equations are, going well or not going well. If they're going well, then our theory goes somewhere closer to the so-called truth. But trying to visualize this, you get into trouble, because it would be boring. It would be like this very first seconds of the film, when you have one pixel on the screen and it means one, or is, and there is nothing on the screen, which means there is nothing, and 0, 1, 0, 1. And how to show like binary is not, it isn't, there is not good way to show it in minimalistic way. So I had to figure out, as an artist, ways to show it in an interesting ways, but trying very hard to create the impression in a different part of the body, for example, by sound, by buzzing sound, by flashing screen. That's what visual artists do. They are trying to make your senses talk to a different senses, I would call it. And I have this kind of synesthetic way of seeing things, where I sometimes see sounds, and I see, even as we speak now, I see our conversations in a kind of the shape in back of my head right now, which sometimes it makes my life harder, but like during driving a car, that's why I don't drive a car, because as a person with this kind of stuff, I get picture in picture, and my my visual field is suddenly cluttered by things that I'm currently thinking about. And it's very not good when you drive a car, for example.
Which is very interesting, because the character in Sailor was a synesthesiac, I think, as well.
Exactly, because it was kind of based on me in many ways. So the first part of the photo was very synesthetic, And none of the scientists who were watching this had no problem with them because they knew that this is not a scientific paper. The film is not a scientific paper, but they still agreed because I was consulting also with them. It's not like I made a film and I was just showing and tell me it's good or bad. No, it was like 3 stages or 4 stages of iterations of going back of going to the scientist saying if it's okay. He says like no, it doesn't look right. Then I was just correcting it, and after few times they said like yeah, it feels okay, and then I was ready with my scene, for example. So after this kind of working, it's not a problem, I think.
I think what Hugo was also partially relating to in his previous question was because I showed him also fragments of Sailor and this idea of life shapes that you introduced there,
Yeah,
which was very much based on the set of data, like the question,
exactly.
the very detailed questionnaire, and that was then translated to visual. So like I guess also question was relating if that method was also somehow applied in Photon, or that was entirely rendered from a scratch according to how you visualized it in the first place.
There are scenes like made in a similar way, but the life shapes is I would say this not scientific enough to fit to Photon, but it was okay to fit inside the Sailor because from how I see it, Sailor is a high school unpaid physics teacher, and the Photon is a rather higher tier science teacher in a good university. So Sailor was like more. There was like more magical thinking. It's like more this the guy, the narrator from the Sailor was nasty, was very unpleasant in comparison to a guy from Photon who is still not David Attenborough of physics, and so life shapes are not too optimistic, I think, way of seeing things. I mean, it's like measuring someone's life by his not deeds, but by his objective achievements, I would say. In a very short term, the life shapes are three-dimensional sculptures, physical or digital, which are generated mm, uh, on the data which is provided by a person who wants to have this life shape of his own. And there is this form like uh, 100 questions or so, questions about their life, everything which can be quantified. So how many partners you had, how many kilometers you travel, more or less, how many people you have in your company, and how much of Google search terms is about you in general in the internet, and so on, and in a very ugly way, this sculpture was, expressions of your influence on the world, which of course made people who had not too big influence to feel much worse with those very tiny, uh, boring life shapes in comparison to the life shape of any known person or any celebrity or whoever who automatically wins because of Google search and so on. So in Sailor, I wanted to play around with this, I would say, scientific approach where you use something quasi scientific to prove like any uh, yes, I would say it's very anti-scientific, and a lot of guys who are a lot of folk who are you know anti-scientific.
And I think that the character is using it to back up his own anxieties and obsessions in life.
Exactly. That's how anti-COVID movement works. very broad talking. It's it's for a different it's a topic for a different discussion. But yes, that's how anti-science work exactly. And it didn't fit to a photon anymore, but it fit to the Sailor, which was first.
What strikes me a lot with the way that you talk about your work, but also how it becomes apparent how much time you invest in acquiring the knowledge to back up some of the ideas that are in your work, is this idea of maybe control, how much of the process is in your own hands and how much of that you influence directly. How do you see that relationship between yourself as a filmmaker and the works that you make, and also, you know, in many other hands, some of the stuff that you're animating or generating in terms of visuals in Photon would be outsourced to somebody else. But here you seem, as an autodidact, also still entirely embracing this very ambitious DIY approach. How important for you is it to have that authorial control over your work as a director?
It's very important, but it's also a curse for me because you can't have everything. And except making the music, if I would also make a music, I would do everything for this film, to be honest. And that would be crazy. And it's still crazy when I think about Photon. I even counted one just for fun. I covered about 20 jobs in Photon. As you know, if we were doing this in Hollywood, the job stuff I was doing in Photon would be covered with 20 people or more. And it's crazy that I've made it, actually, when I look it from a distance. But to be honest, I started another film project, and I'm doing it even more and even harder than in the Photon. So that's the problem with myself. But it's not, you want to have everything under control. It's great because the film looks as it's yours. It's very, the cinema, which is visually very yours. How I don't know the word for it. And this is what's not, you don't find it in Hollywood, in Netflix films, because they're compartments. You don't have very visionary feel in modern films. I remember when in Hollywood, David Fincher, for example, was a guy who was very like, it was his film with his way of seeing, showing, with his, he was a visionary, but
And very
he had
obsessive in how often he needs to redo a shoot.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. But in comparison to me in Photon, he had this, a lot of people working with. He had guys for carrying cables on the set. Jesus Christ, I did everything. Like I was when being on the Iceland shooting scenes for the Photon from the early Earth scenes. I was doing Steadicam. I was doing driving, transporting, organizing the route to shoot, location scouts. I was, after getting back home, I was importing it, editing it, adding post effect, making 3D, visuals, and researching the 3D, 3D, structure of the molecules, reading about the process in the paper. The stretch is crazy, and still 5 years it's not bad, because
No.
5 years it's still just very usual in Hollywood. You get 5 years for a 150 crew film, So my next film, the current one, will take probably 15 years.
I
Because it's
remember.
even worse,
I remember when we spoke when you were still raising money for Photon, and you were showing me the storyboards, and you were frustrated that the producers are making you to apply for triple the amount that you think is needed for making that film.
Exactly.
So yeah, I remember that. I'm wondering if the film that you're mentioning right now, because the audience, at least like those who were at the festival in Venice this year, they might have come across a kind of a work in progress piece of yours, which was made in VR,
Yeah,
called
it was kind of
Pilot.
exactly.
So I'm wondering if that's the let's say the birth of that project that you're now mentioning, and also because it's a VR project, and we are talking about technology right now, and I know that you have a very long and intimate relation with technology and with different ways of using computers from very early age. So I'm wondering like how much in your, because you were also a painter and I guess you still do that from time to time, but how much the technology is a factor, and like learning the technology and trying new technologies is a factor in your practice.
It's okay. Wouldn't call myself like guy who s- every every week he has to have a new toy to play with. It's not me. I just use the technology as a tool, and if it's too cumbersome, I just drop it and go looking somewhere else. It's like tool. It's like brush. I mean, the tool for expression your ideas or your dreams on the canvas, on the screen. Right. So if it helps, it's okay. I use it, and if it doesn't, I just drop it. And for example, VR, I have a very big problem with VR at the current stage, and that's why I wanted to try to do this little spin-off uh, from the film that I'm working. I wanted to try something in VR to see how it works, but the VR is still too niche to be nice just to put it and work. It's still cumbersome. It still requires batteries, and it's I know there is the big press for VR, and Facebook is somehow the Meta. Sorry, is re, I would say it, maybe not responsible for that, but they're pushing this. They're still pushing this idea of VR, but it's too early, in my opinion, and that's why I don't use VR in everyday's work. Uh, and so I'm not very hyped up on every new the NFT, the bitcoins. I am not too much. I'm pretty. Someone might expect that as a guy who's with computers from 20 years, I would jump straight into Bitcoin, into NFTs. No, I'm really skeptical about that at this moment. Uh, so this. So as I thought in the first sentence, it's just a tool for me. If it works, it's okay.
Yeah, I think actually that Photon also shows a kind of like a societal critique and the use of implementation of technology in contemporary society, and then speculating where that might up ending.
Yes.
So I see maybe that some of these technologies that you mentioned factor into that as well, as in being interested in technology in itself doesn't mean that you embrace every aspect of it, because some of it is
Exactly.
tainted by ideology as well. And I think that your film Photon is, besides all the things that we just discussed, a very strong piece of critique as well.
Exactly. And also, in terms of I don't want to spoil because I don't know when this podcast will be, listened to. But in terms of the end of the Photon, the film ending, many people just ask me if do I find it optimistic or pessimistic? This kind of vision of future transhumanity or humanity 2.0, however you call it. For me, it's okay. I mean, it, I'm in. If it's going to look like it's shown in the Photon, I'm really okay, and I want to be part of it. Uh, but not for, but it doesn't mean that I will be very, happy when people start to walking the street with, just like it's in cyberpunk video game where they have this, stuff in their eyes where that they're looking inside their head right now, and they're not just here, they're in the different uh, reality, doing brain dance or any other weird VR stuff. So I'm not happy too much, but I see it's going this way. I'm sorry. The human race will not be like it's now forever. We're during the very slow transition to transhumanism, and you cannot stop that. And I see for most people, or most people who are not too much into this general discussion about future and so on, they're afraid. They don't want to future look like in the Photon. It's shown in the last 15 minutes in Photon. They're afraid of this new. There's something spiritual about this, and they think it will, deprive the humanity of spirit, of this. I would say honesty of a person who has this body, works with this body, has mm, to drink, eat, exercise. It's fine for them. For me, the body is a problem. I mean, it's so lagging behind the mind. It becomes in general, even if in my life, I feel my mind is racing so much, and this whole damn body, gravity, and every physical aspect is dragging this mind, down, slowing it. You have to sleep, you have to eat during the sessions of making the film, or I hate to eat in general. If it would be possible to get a pill or 1 month's value of just
Nutrients.
injection.
All the foodies out there are having nightmares right now.
Exactly. And it would be great for me. So I'm in this transhuman, I'm okay with that in the future, and mind uploading thing, for example. Why not? I'm very curious how it would look like. I would also would like to know how the reality looks from the point of view of my dog. If I could transfer his, you know, his brain and somehow look it up as a film or as a multisensory experience. Why not? For some people, it's breaking something I was holy, like you're breaking some unity of life, or however. No, it's unless you're not doing harm to someone, it's everything is okay, I think.
I think there was a life form of a dog as well, eventually at some
Yeah,
point
there is. Yeah.
in Sailor, or
Yeah, it was very simple and very like sad, because it was a life form of some kind of village dog that has a very short, sad life, and it was like very short stick and nothing else in comparison to human lives. Who had friends, travels, visiting others' families, and so on. Then as a dog, you're a very poor, sad creature with very small influence on the external world, actually.
Speaking of dogs, because we promised you we'll keep it short, because your dog needs attention. So
Okay.
thank you so much for coming in on the podcast.
It was a pleasure, Norman. Thank you so much.
Thank
was
you
a
so
great.
much, and I hope we will meet again soon, Staszek, because we know each other from a very long time, I would say, and that's also, I'm happy to talk to you right now, because I haven't seen you for a long time, and it's okay. I mean, it was pleasure to talk with you.
Likewise, and I hope we'll get to see each other soon in relation to the upcoming project.
Yeah.
And maybe some other things that might be in the works that we should not be talking about yet. But
Exactly.
But keep your eyes open for new things coming up from Norman Leto, and of course, do not forget to come to the screening of Photon at Imagine.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Next up, Steye Hallema is calling in to explore how making his VR experience Imaginary Friend was almost akin to act of conducting magic or performing alchemy.
Before we start, I think it's good. I'm Hugo Emerzel, and this is Stan. Together we do the podcast, so it's a pleasure to have you here. In this episode, which is about alchemy related to technology as an aspect or kind of like organizing principle of it, this morning we already had one guest, Norman Leto, who made a film Photon that is also playing at the Imagine Film Festival, and who also, as an autodidact and kind of like very experimental DIY film auteur from Poland, is also dabbling in VR at this point. So there's some interesting overlap with you as a very, let's say, established figure in the world of immersive experiences.
That sounds interesting.
And we already had a little exchange yesterday before, and around the time that we were discussing the possibility of recording that podcast, and we started with this slight skepticism, or your skepticism, with this notion, or your participation in the podcast on technology. Not because you don't use technology, but maybe technology is not the decisive factor in your artistic choices. And this is also the sentiment that Norman Leto in our previous conversation shared when asked about VR. He was very adamant about the shortcomings of technology still, and about the fact that for him, kind of technology is more like a brush. So like he's striving to make a very particular type of painting, and then he's just picking the right brushes. So I guess we wanted to lead with that question of, you were one of the early adapters on the Dutch scene as well. Like, you went to VR very early on. We've seen, and a lot of people in the Netherlands could have seen already, your previous VR work, Ashes to Ashes. And now you come back with Imaginary Friend, which was many years in the making. So I'm wondering, what was your draw in the first place? Like, what was that promise of VR that you followed and that made you stick with it for all those years?
Wow. Okay. So many questions in a way, and so many answers. Let's start with the beginning. I was actually already doing VR before I knew what VR was. And it had to do with that I was part of a theater group called Pips Lab, and we were basically a bunch of nerds. And one of the nerdiest of nerds is the amazing artist Kees Duivis. He found a way to put a camera, then still an SD camera, on top of a Chinese ball, and it's like it's reflecting, so that way you can film all around you. And he found a way to make that interactive. So I think that was 1999 or something, that we already were like, oh, wait a second, we can film all around us. And then we're only figuring this out in a way that you could scroll on your computer. You could go like left and right and look yourself. So that put in my head, at least, a new way of thinking, that I could make my own movie in a way as a player. And that was something that was really important for us as a theater group, that we wanted to like involve the audience. So that was basically how I started thinking about it.
So it was a desire for interaction, if I understand correctly as well.
It was a desire to involve the audience. I think I'm part of we're all like, technology is changing in such a way that it involves the player, the viewer, the participant more and more. That's the word. Like, this is a broad kind of trend happening, and I think we were really early adapters in the tools that were offered to us. I think we were one of the first theater groups that were actually putting a computer on stage. If I can give an example, we made a theater piece, an interactive theater piece called Wortel Combat, which was a spoof of Mortal Kombat. Wortel means carrot in Dutch.
Such a funny play on words.
We made games on stage. So So we would take people from the audience and use them in the games that later the audience would play. We were like super pioneers in that, and for some sort of reason, we're quite successful with that. So we really liked doing that because we all felt we were onto something new, and it gave us attention, which is also nice if you're 20 something.
And then moving forward, because now after Ashes to Ashes, now there's the Imagery Friend that's also playing at Imagine Film Festival and has had already a quite impressive run at previous film festivals. This is a project that's been in the making for a long time. So I'm kind of interested in your maybe more definitive shift towards what we call now VR and what the process was of gaining some form of mastery over it, but also maybe experiencing or realizing maybe a sense of sophistication of the material or the technology, because Ashes to Ashes, I've also experienced that when it came out in, I think that was 2017. Since then, I think the Imagery Friend has much more elements to it to involve the player within the experience. So what was that process like for you to maybe make more sophisticated and complicated pieces within this technology now?
Yeah, that relates also back to something Stan said earlier, how I relate to technology. I wouldn't say that I use technology as a brush, or maybe I would. I'm trying to oversee this analogy. But I am in a way, I'm really Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message. I'm definitely not pro technology, but I do see that technologies offer chances to tell stories. I do believe that as a species, humans, we are technology. We are technological species. We are technology in a way. I think already language is a technology. We do inventions that help us further or backwards. Every technology is, I also think, a double-edged sword. I really like to think of what a technology can tell. So why I jumped on VR when VR all of a sudden was a hype was that it gives the player a role in the story. And since I had been doing that since 1999 or earlier, that felt coming naturally to me. Ashes to Ashes was a 360 cinematic VR piece, which kind of used the role of the player. To be honest, we really had when we had the script, we really had to improvise to get it right, and it's still not completely right. But you don't really see that because all the rest we did very well. I think, like the multi-layer, the intention to make you really involved as a viewer more than a player. I guess. I still think the role you had in Ashes to Ashes as a deceased grandfather in an urn is a little bit far-fetched, but some sort of way it worked. But I also I made viewers in that sense because in 360 VR I think you're still a viewer. I made them a human in the future that will be upgraded to the latest iOS kind of thing. I made them a visitor in a peep show. I made them a Trump on its first day in office. Like many things, and I felt 360 video wasn't compelling enough or wasn't right for the imaginary friend when I had the imaginary friend idea. Because the imaginary friend is really about the connection between the player and the story and the main character. That's the heart of the idea because the main character makes you up as a player. So I had to be much more sophisticated with breaking through the fourth wall, and then I started looking for technology that could facilitate that.
It's interesting that that you say that about the main character and making you up, because a big part of the imaginary friend is also that the main character really loves to draw and has this rich visual imagination. So it kind of makes sense that what you experience in the experience kind of comes out of that his creative mind in a sense, and it kind of ties into what you were saying about the human as this technological species, that you draw this direct connection between drawing on the piece of paper, just plain old 2D analog drawings, and VR as almost coming from the same vein of human imagination. Do you see that connection as well?
I don't think I understand the question. It's intriguing though.
I think Hugo is making an analogy because when you say, like even the language can be considered a technology. Yeah. And here, basically, you are the extension of the imagination of the boy in the piece, and of course, the boy expresses himself also in the drawing, and this is how he pictures a lot of things that are happening in his mind. And
Yeah.
this is pretty much the same faculty of imagination and fantasy that brings you to life and those drawings to life. So
Yeah.
the fact that it's high tech actually makes no difference. It's the same
as the low tech drawing of the kid.
Yeah, well, I guess so. Like, well, there's a clear difference between the high tech and the low tech. He makes you up, so it was to materialize thought, like drawing, like what kids do. It's like their most natural way to materialize thought. So that felt really natural. I never thought about the analogy actually. That in the end, VR is also materialized thought. It is materialized thought. That's definitely correct. It's a little bit harder than a drawing, though. It's interesting because during the process of making the imaginary friend, at a certain point, you work with such a big team that I took drawing and painting lessons again in the Zoo of Amsterdam in Artist to do that again myself because I'm just behind Google Documents, email, and meetings because all other people are really like doing stuff with their hands and making it.
It was removing you almost too much from the creative process of being an artist?
Yes, in a way. Well, at least being in a direct way. I'm still the artist, like I'm the one that's putting it together. But I started missing the joy of the directness of doing something with my hands and brain and having a direct result. Because everything went through the amazing artists that I worked with to get it together.
And speaking about that, because both Ashes to Ashes and Imaginary Friend still retain this live action component, and a lot of people, already in Venice when this piece premiered, were thinking back to another piece that came out a couple of years ago, which was Wolves in the Wall, which was also putting the audience member in the position of the, let's say, imaginary friend. But the main difference, also aesthetic difference between those two pieces, because obviously there's also huge emotional difference and differences in the story, is also the technology used that I think has a great impact in terms of how we relate to the main character. Can you say a little bit about the choice of using, because the imaginary friend uses a very sophisticated volumetric capture as well, so you actually have an actor very skilled, very relatable kid casted in the main role. So can you say a little bit about this blend of a live action and rendered elements in the imaginary friend?
Sure. Well, because it started as a 360 idea, and at a certain point I realized that 360 video wasn't working with this idea. I had to look further, and then, well, the most obvious choice would have been animated, and then I also realized like it would be maybe too close to Wolves in the Wall. Although I also don't believe that because I think I tell a different story. But I've also felt it wasn't my first skill set to do that. It wouldn't be close enough to me, although I have been an animator actually for quite some time. Not really creating, doing character animations, but I know animation for real. It just felt that breaking that fourth wall with an animated character wouldn't bring me as far as volumetric video, because volumetric video is a real human. And my theory about this, at least, is that we humans are evolved in thousands of years of evolution to read each other. We look at each other and we make all these assumptions of where this other person is to understand each other. That is one of our greatest skill set. That's also in a way a technology that we that allows us to collaborate in a way that no other animal on this planet can, not even ants. And I think is is why we're such a dominant species as well. So we can read each other so well. To animate that level is really hard. It is possible, but I felt I could go to a different place with volumetric video. So first I tried let's call it hybrid volumetric video, basically depth kit, really pioneered by this really wonderful company, Scatter in New York. But I felt that that way of their technology wasn't suitable also because it basically it has an in-depth camera and it has a DSLR, like a really good camera, and you combine these and then you have like a depth image and you combine this with really high resolution images, and then it can look amazing. With one downside though, it has streaks. So for example, the camera can never film in between the hand and the body. So it has a beautiful aesthetic, but also aesthetic that for me is about memory or maybe the future. It has a memory. It's like it has a quality that comes from somewhere far away, and it's now here as a hologram telling us something from the past or the spirit world or something. And because I wanted this kid to be real, and also in his jumpiness, I didn't feel that was the quality, the aesthetic quality of that way of working wasn't right. So I'm since 4 years now already, I'm working as an in-house director for what I call full volumetric video, which is basically a studio that has 32 cameras now. We have 48 cameras pointing inwards. In that way, they can capture a full volumetric video of an actor, a humans or animals even. And that was really the right way. I felt that would be the way to go, but then there were all different kinds of challenges because editing volumetric video is hard, and also I felt crossing the fourth wall, which was really important for my idea, also required interaction, and so I had to kind of make volumetric video interactive, which was a whole challenge in itself.
Which is precisely where we wanted to go, I guess, with the next question, because I think like one of these notions that I find super useful in talking about VR that was introduced in the last couple of years is this notion of presence design, which is precisely what you just highlighted in this introduction to Imaginary Friend. But so basically, you design the way that the spectator or the player is present within the experience. And in your piece, that's really effective because like you are never left to wonder what is your role in the story. Like that role is framed from the get-go. Which is why I think like that piece never leaves you confused about like your presence and your role in that story. But one of the ways of supporting that role is actually a big degree of interactions that are kind of extremely gripping. And I wanted to ask you about that and striking the right balance and designing those interactions, because there's also something very interesting that a lot of VR makers are kind of shying away from different labels. So for example, if you would call something they made a game, like they would maybe take offense in that. But what you said in the beginning about technology and that we are technological animals and like that already those technologies around us exist. So maybe it's easier to use already certain ways in which we are used to using those technologies to our advantage rather than dismiss them. So I guess like in broad strokes, like my question is about the planning of those interactions, but also embracing those gaming and gamified elements in order to raise the level of involvement in the piece.
Yeah, well, this is obviously a process, and I think we maybe because I'm already working on interactive pieces for a long time, like the process is ingrained in me. It's really you have to make this so iterative. So first of all, like there's so many ways I can answer these questions. I will try to do all of them. I have to give really big credits to Paul Staring, and also to Frank Bosma, the developers. Like I just want interactions that come from story. So this is what I do. So I am really looking for, okay, I don't want to explain an interaction. I want the interaction to be meaningful in the story. But then how Paul, with all his gaming experience as a developer, has been able to find the right interaction that was like didn't need a lot of explanation, that you would just floop into and and would understand like straight away that is really like his and also Frank's talent to balance and finalize that in such a way that it's actually working. But it's also, how do you put this together? Like VR, making interactive VR is hard. Like if I compare to film, and I don't want to diminish film at all, but it's in the end, if you edit, it's two layers. It's sound and image, and maybe visual effects. But VR, you have all these layers. You have space. You tell with space. You tell with interaction. You tell with story. You tell with being there. You tell with sound. Then there's how you design the 3D stuff. Then there's acting. So there's all these layers you have to kind of like balance out. So
Plus, you got these like scripted computer basically moments where the player needs to do something for the next thing to trigger in the experience.
exactly, like it's really hard. So we have a methodology that first we made a narrative script. I had my girlfriend do all the voices of the kid. So I used the timelines in Unity, and I just make the linearity of the whole piece, and I can create kind of like the space, very sketchy. And then I in that linearity, I put the interactions just in words, where the interactions should be with a short description. So we don't have to have elaborate talks with developers like where what comes. They kind of know where it is, and they can experience sort of themselves, and then they build the interactions very rudimentary, and then I can do the story with their interactions in them. So we have kind of like this interactive storyboards prototype, and that's really helpful because then I have like the meaning of their interactions with the story, and we can slowly. This is basically the skeletons. You can put the organs in, and you can put the muscles on, and eventually the skin around, and then like slowly by slowly putting every element and testing, and especially also with testing audiences, you get it right. Because also like me as a like for one of the hard things for me as a director at a certain point, I've seen it so much. I'm the least qualified person to make any judgment of how it should be. So it's really about having a testing audience, and make them like kill all your assumptions until it works.
And not to read too much into maybe your biography, but you just said the word intuitive, and I think that's a very important word in to describe how to experience maybe some of these works, just like an imaginary friend. Steye, you're the son of a magician, and you yourself have a lot of experience in your background in theater. Do these two things maybe factor into your considerations of how something so complicated and convoluted technologically as a VR experience can also just be fun and immediate and intuitive for the player or the audience that experiences it?
Absolutely. Although I've never identified with a theater maker, also because like the group of nerds that Pipslab was, we kind of by accident evolved in a theater group, but we were never out to make theater. It was just like this black box with speakers and lights. It was the right place to do what we do. I would say like I've been a musician for a long time as well, and being a musician really is my ground as a director, in the sense that like, as a musician you learn to count. First this comes, then it takes so long for this, then like all the cues and
Or the story beats almost.
the story beats. Also as a musician, it's you learn how to think in layers, how different layers come up, like create a whole. Also as a songwriter, you kind of tell a story with words, with sound, with attitude. So it's already like those are the layers that you start telling stories with. Then as a frontman with the band, you try to read an audience. like a band leader is much more interactive than a theater maker most of the time. So you learn audiences. It's learning how to work with people, and like with all the musicians as the frontman, as the songwriter. I learned how to push maybe the guitar player just a little bit further, like how to read him, like what can he bring more to create funk, and make it funkier. Like this, those are all kind of like really important factors, I think. In that sense, I have been a theater maker, but I also have been an animator. So I kind of know the digital world a little bit, although I've never really been a coder. I've at a certain point I was able to write expressions in After Effects, but at some point it was too hard for my brain to really do code. So I just have a really big respect for coders. As a director, I do try to understand technology as good as possible, because in the end, an artistic choice is made on resources. You know, how much time can a developer put into this idea? So I have to know like how much resources a certain idea costs, because most of the time I can fix it with story. Sometimes something that's really hard to build with a different sentence by the main character, I can fix it, and we're done in a day. So in that sense, I think a big chunk of my work is working around technology. Um, Bringing it back to my father being a magician, I I think I was I got a really nice compliment of my by my father when he was at the premiere. He said like, okay, so I'm a magician, but you are a wizard, which is a wonderful compliment, and I would like that to be true. But in the end, I'm still a magician. It's a magic trick, and it's basically magic is uh, maybe I'm a wizard, but let me explain what that means. But doing magic is you have kind of a technology. It's a very simple trick. It's how do you get this coin from another to the other part of your hand, or maybe in your pocket, or whatever way. That is with a sleight of hand, the audience doesn't see it. But the magic is created when you have this story that involve the audience in such a way that you stay your attention. Um, what maybe creates the real magic and maybe perhaps makes me into a wizard, but it's not about me being the magician, like being on stage, creating the awe of the maker. It's about the player. So I really think about what happens with the player. And I think that's where the magic is. That's where the real magic is, that you as the player, you are involved, and I create magic inside of you, feeling something, experience something, instead of only the awe.
So there is a transformation in the audience member at stake here. If we bring it back to alchemy, it's the transformation within the spectator that
which
you're
which
causing.
music does, which film does. I think one of, although I love magic and I love the world that magic is still in, it's this kind of weird mix of ingenious people and kitsch, and I don't know, like it's a wonderful world my father has lived in. But I think in the end, it's the magician on stage doing a trick, and everyone thinks like this guy is brilliant. And I think for me that is not interesting. I feel flattered you asking me questions, but it's really not about me.
But I guess like one thing that I'm still interested in, because you said about the band leader and all that, and I guess this is also a role that you take up in another project of yours, which is the Smartphone Orchestra, where you really maybe I could call you a social conductor when you're doing that, and you're really conducting those social relationships. So I guess I wanted to ask you about the difference as well, like how different it is to conduct a group of people and those social relationships in Smartphone Orchestra, and conducting a singular personal experience in VR piece like Imaginary Friend.
Do you think the listener to the podcast understands well enough now what a smartphone orchestra is?
Maybe let's explain very briefly.
Okay. Well, the smartphone orchestra is kind of a methodology, and also a technology to to involve big groups of people through their own phones. So it started as an idea to synchronize all the phones and send different but fitting musical parts to this phone, so all the phones could become one big magical sound carpet. But it evolved into something I think much more interesting, which is a tool to involve the audience. So we can ask them questions. We can use those questions in a database and give them assignments. We can let them meet each other, connect to each other. We can give them assignments to do choreographical moves, so you can really like create group experiences unlike anything else. And I think we're really big pioneers. Hardly anyone in the world does what we does. And for me to start answering your questions, it's kind of like the same thing, but it's also different because VR mostly is more of uh, uh, a solo experience. Although, like, I'm with great interest, I'm looking into multiplayer experiences. But but I feel what the smartphone orchestra really brings is that you're in the real world with real humans, and we overlay this real networks of real humans with a digital network, and that creates uh, basically a reference network. So we can, as real humans in the room, as a group of people, as we have been for millions of years, we can have this technology network laid over us, and then we can really see what this network, this digital network is doing with us. And I think in this day and age, that's really important. It also creates real connections with real humans. So that's why I perhaps love it even more than VR. But to bring it back to, like, for me, in a way, as my craft as a wizard, it's all it all is how do I communicate with this participant? How to involve this participant? So all the books next to my bed to my bed are psychology books. I really like to know if I create pieces that are about you, the player. Who is this player? Who are you? So I try to understand this.
I guess we will ask you about bibliography later on to to post on our social media as well. Thank you, Steye, so much. I think we had also a great picture painted by you of this transformative power of technology and how that technology in different instances can actually, in the end, be a very human factor of creating new insights, empathy, and transformation. And we invite everyone, obviously, to come to Imagine and to experience Imaginary Friend, the new piece by Steye Hallema, which is going to be shown alongside 6 other latest beautiful VR works that we're going to be featuring at Imagine that touch upon very similar themes, but use different strategies to create that transformation. So, Steye, thank you so much. Congratulations on the piece. It's really gorgeous, and we're really proud to be able to present it to our audience at the Imagine Film Festival.
Yeah, thanks that you like it so much, and I really like that it's in the Imagine Festival.
As you said once before, at the festival called Imagine, we couldn't pass on a piece called Imaginary Friend. So
yeah, I feel it's really at home at your festival. So so thanks for having me.
Thank you, Steye. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Steye.
All right, guys. Thanks. Bye.
This was an episode of the Imagine Film Festival podcast exploring the theme of fantastic alchemy, hosted by us, Stanisław Liguziński
and Hugo Emerzaal. This podcast series is produced by Ines de Co and edited by Tom Ooms.
If you're listening to this before our upcoming festival edition, we invite you to come join us at Imagine Film Festival taking place in Lab 111 and Filmhallen from the 25th of October to the 4th of November 2023. Check our website at imaginefilmfestival.nl for the complete festival program, or follow Imagine Film Festival on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.
Thank you for listening, and make sure you tune in to the remaining episodes of the podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye.